Thanks.
So we'll get started. Welcome everyone, and I know we'll have some folks maybe kind of trickling in as we go. I just wanted to maybe just briefly say our intention here today. The Civic Saturday piece was something we started this fall. It's really just this experiment of bringing people together during difficult times. This idea of just coming together to connect, to focus on these pieces that we can control and influence in a time that feels really overwhelming. Just to find ways of coming together, connecting with each other, and especially for today, just sort of exploring some work and some journeys and pathways and things that seeking change that you may be interested in seeing in Winona, especially this coming year. So we'll have some music. We'll have the music from Dante and Mason from Karate Chop Silence. We'll have some poetry from Marcia Ratliff. I'll do a short talk, and then really the second half of this will be everybody in small group conversations. It'll be a great chance for you to share sort of where you're at and where you're hoping to head in community. So I think just briefly, just to give folks 30 seconds to settle into this space, just to sit back and kind of wiggle in your chair a little bit. We spend all these long days in chairs or wherever you happen to be sitting. So unclench your jaw, wiggle that out a little bit. Shoulders, check in with your shoulders and just kind of lift them up, push them back and push them down. I always push too hard, so maybe you can be gentle. I'm not a good model for this. And just to kind of relax into this space, we'll be here for about an hour and a half together. Whatever you set aside to spend time here today will absolutely be there on the other end of this. And it's not anything you need to worry about or figure out at this point. You can just be here and hang out with this good crew of folks. And just to take a breath in and a big breath out. And another one, and just kind of settling into this space. It's always a little different and virtual, but always just sort of imagining we're in a shared space and looking around and kind of seeing everyone's faces. And at this point, to kick off, I will turn it over to Marcia to share some spoken words and poetry, and then we'll bounce on over to Mason and Dante with Karate Chop Silence, and then kind of continue our morning from there. So Marcia, the virtual floor is yours.
Brian. Hi, everyone. It's so great to see all of you and to be in this space with you. My name is Marcia Ratliff. I am a poet. I live in Winona. And some of my work is online at tornpaperpoems.com. So if you like what you hear, you can find it there. That's sort of been a year-long experiment that I never intended to do during a pandemic, but that happened. And it's sort of been a process for me of just writing almost every day and seeing what comes out. So throughout the fall, I was working on sort of polishing a set of summer poems, and then now I'm looking back at all of my fall poems and digging them out of my journal fresh. So you are seeing the unpublished and somewhat rough-edged work I've been working on. But I've really been exploring the idea of aftermath and what it means to have come through a storm. Because of course, 2020, as it's been shared on social media, it has been a bit of a dumpster fire, all things considered. And so what does it look like when it's over? And obviously we know 2021, January 1st, a switch isn't going to flip, and we're still going to be here, the same people and the same issues. But what do we take from this? And when we're looking at all the pieces scattered in the yard, what do we take away? What survives? And maybe what sticks out for the first time? So a line that I just kind of want to leave you with as a bit of a context is one by Rumi, a 13th century Persian poet that I look to a lot just to get me started. And the line that I was ruminating on was, "You're crying. You say you've burned yourself, but can you think of anyone who's not hazy with smoke?" Just that idea, is any one of us not hazy with smoke? So this is a 3-part poem. kind of takes you into some dark places, but it ends happily. So, part 1. Lately, we're always at the scene of a tragedy. Now, another shooting, another drowning, another confrontation. Somewhere at this moment, a motorcycle backfires, and it sounds like a firework, sounds like a gunshot, and the screams at the playground could be in delight or terror for how I feel them between my shoulder blades, a tightening, ready to run. Everything is escalation. Our edges grind against each other, grown harder in the cold. Like reaching for a handshake and grasping sleeve, everything warm pulls away. At the scene of the accident, caution tape snakes toward the drain. There are couples taking engagement photos, calm lake water, and the reflection of trees. Part 2. What is an emergency? Or when does an emergency grow stale, outlasting the initial horror until it becomes something to keep an eye on? I'm keeping my eye on the lines at food banks and polling sites. I'm watching wildfire smoke smudge across the sky that has caught rubber bullets and warning shots from AR-15s. Sky that contains the molecules from the last breath of George Floyd and too many others. We want to have time to heal, time to recover. We want the arc of the universe to slowly bend toward justice amid a hum of suffering. But this is an emergency. How much time do we have left? Part 3. Call it a season of disarray. We stand shaken as if a storm has just rolled through. Caught in a perpetual aftermath, we survey the pieces of everything and wonder what to salvage. What's even worth saving? Out with the old, in with the new. I'm rushing toward the dumpster with an armload of fear and disgust. Then back to the pile. Some things are broken, it's true, but some are whole. Untouched, actually, glistening after the rain. Gardens, casserole dishes offered with notes, chalk messages still bright on the sidewalks, communities of helpers blinking in the sun. So, look closely now and turn each piece. Hold it up to the light. It may prove useful for the journey ahead. Thank you. All right. So thanks, everyone. Yeah, it's weird in Zoom when you read into silence, but I love like watching your faces as I go. So that's really nice. I have another couple for us here, and this was part of my project of exploring how to hold space for all of the perspectives. You know, a month ago, there was an election and that's done and we're all still here. And these are the folks that we're working with. This is our community. And I've been exploring the idea of equanimity, of holding things without judgment. So these poems, I guess it's sort of like one poem, but in 2 parts, explores that. So, equanimity. So many of us have never met, and yet we act as if we have. Labels based on yard signs and retweets. Or maybe it's actually so many of us have met each other, made eye contact, and yet we act as if we occupy separate universes. I have waited next to you at the liquor store, at the DMV, for a COVID test, for a smoothie, in line for the bathroom, at the movie theater, in a different time. At a stoplight, we stared at each other across the intersection, both hoping to turn left and get home. We have nodded at each other on the lake path and stared at the same toddler learning how to walk in the soft grass. And so it goes. We're having this conversation and it's awkward. The pursuit of clarity, the lack of equivocation, everything pointing one way. When does nature ever display that? With equanimity, it holds the wolf and the deer, the fox and the rabbit. Still, some springs run totally clear from ground to ground. Maybe I don't have to talk about nature. Maybe you are already listening, and the river runs, and it sounds like voices that always agree to keep talking. Why don't we keep trying? Build proximity amid the distance, in the shadow of these soft and ancient hills. That's the end. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for sharing that in those words into the space. I'm going to put, Marcia mentioned her website, and I think as I transition over to Mason and Dante, I'll put that link in the chat too. And there's a lot more work there. And Marcia will be back with us on the second half of this. And so really one of the intentions of this is really just to spotlight all of the amazing creativity and wisdom and expertise and just this generative capacity we have in our own communities, which is, and just the beautiful expression of it through art and music. So thanks, Marcia. And at this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mason. I see you there. I'm hoping you can hear me. I got a thumbs up. I'll turn it over to you and Dante for some music.
All righty, buckle up, gang. Got some lovely instrumental tunes coming your way. It's a classical piece that Dante wrote, and we like to play. Oh, this one is a little folk piece that I use as a a finger drills exercise, but it's a fun one. 1, 2, 3, 4. And those were the instrumental tunes.
Thanks. That was fantastic and light and with breath. It's a really good way to set us up for 2021. I think that light has sounded good. So they didn't introduce themselves, but that's Mason and Dante from the band Karate Chop Silence, who is on the internet and plays around town and lots of other places too. So we will share some links for them in the chat too. What I'd like to do at this point is just give folks a second to connect. This is, as you're imagining that were this to be in a shared space, we would just turn around in our chairs and say hi to each other. Not the case here. And so we'll do small breakout rooms. Facilitators, you're just participants in this. We don't have to worry about kind of guiding anything. Just gonna bounce folks into small groups just to connect and for only about 5 minutes or so to share just a recent small joy in your life, something that feels like a bright spot or something good that's happened, doesn't have to be big, and then something you're looking forward to in the coming months. As a way of kind of pushing back against sometimes some of this heaviness and overwhelming, just to share something that's feeling really good. So I'm going to bounce folks into just 3 breakout rooms, and so that'll put 4 to 5 folks in each one. It'll just be about 5 minutes, and then we'll come back for a couple of readings and then some longer conversations together. Welcome back, everyone. I think I see everyone. Hi, Joe. Good to see you. It's always fun and a bit surreal seeing everybody sort of spiral back in from those small groups, and the fact that you took every second available to you, I always take as a good sign. What I'm going to do, I'm going to turn it over to Molly to provide a reading. I'm going to do a short talk on just sort of community change making and some things to look forward to in 2021. And then we'll be back we'll actually do maybe 2 small groups, so you have slightly larger kind of groups and folks to connect with, just to share more, just to kind of signpost this for you, just to share more and be thinking about some of the joys and bright spots you've seen in community in 2020, especially in Winona community, despite everything else we faced. And then thinking about looking forward to 2021. Engage Winona's focus is really on supporting and elevating change makers and good ideas and turning those ideas into reality. And we're just really interested in hearing what some of those ideas that you may have and just sharing those with others. And sometimes the first step towards change is just speaking something out loud into a space. You're not committing to anything. You're just saying, wouldn't it be cool if this happened in Winona in 2021? So Molly, I'll turn it over to you for a reading.
Hi, so good to see everyone this morning. This is a good time. I know for me, sometimes it's helpful to like take inspiration from other human beings who seem to be doing something right. And I think one of those human beings who has risen to my awareness and has been in my awareness my whole life pretty much, but is really front and center this year, Dolly Parton. So maybe 2020 was really the year of Dolly Parton in disguise. Maybe our resolution in 2021 should be asking ourselves, what would Dolly Parton do? I think we should make bracelets. A brief timeline now of the year of Dolly Parton. So in January, she celebrated her 75th birthday with the launch of Dolly Fest, a worldwide stadium tour. Also in January, she accidentally drove the creation of one of 2020's most popular memes with her 4-panel photo array titled, "Get You a Woman Who Can Do It All." In March, she celebrated the 30th anniversary of personally promising every member of junior high school classes in a Tennessee county school that she went to when she was younger, that she would give them $500 if they picked a buddy, supported each other, and graduated on time. She did that, and it reduced the dropout rate at that school from 30%, which is super high, to 6%. In April, she donated $1 million to COVID-19 research at Vanderbilt University, which ended up partially funding the development of the Moderna COVID vaccine. In May, she published a new song about the pandemic called "When Life is Good Again." The lyrics include the lines, "I'll try to be someone on which you can depend, a helping hand to lend. Let's open up our eyes and see what's going on if we're to move along from where we've been." June, the Winona Public Library launched the local chapter of Dolly Parton's Imagination Library, which provides free, hand-selected, age-appropriate, high-quality books each month to children ages 0 to 5. The program, inspired by her own father's inability to read or write, has since sent more than 120 million books to young children across the country. In July, an online petition calling to replace all Confederate statues in Tennessee with statues of Dolly Parton wrapped up after receiving tens of thousands of signatures. I want one in Winona. In August, she transformed the relationship of countless of her fans to Black Lives Matter during a spontaneous comment in a media interview, where she said, "I understand people having to make themselves known and to feel seen. And of course, Black Lives Matter. Do we think our little white asses are the only ones that matter? No. As soon as you realize that something's a problem, you should fix it. Don't be a dumbass. That's where my heart is." In October, a New Yorker article praising a recent book about Dolly Parton describes a Dolly Parton concert as like a local consensus, bringing together peoples across lines of race, gender, sexuality, and miraculously, political affiliation. November, tiny little thing, saved the life of a 9-year-old co-star during the filming of a Netflix movie by pulling her out of the path of an oncoming vehicle. She was described as an angel. And it's December now, right? So who knows? Let's keep an eye on the news these next few weeks.
Thanks, Molly. That was the 2020 timeline of Dolly Parton, which in this strange sideways year we've had, as we were putting some of this together last night, I couldn't really sort of imagine a better role model, I think, maybe for 2021. I mean, Dolly Parton has more resources than some of us do, but I think the spirit is the same. I mean, what I love about it is that, especially in community change, it's so easy to get wrapped up in like trying to find the perfect solution or doing the perfect right thing at the right time. Or there's an alternative of just saying, hey, that looks cool. I have some resources and time. I'm just going to do it and see what happens. Including pulling a kid out of the path of a moving vehicle. So there's such a nice energy around that spirit of spontaneity and creativity, rather than having to think too hard or work too hard, but just do it and see what happens. What I'd like to do is share just a short talk that I wrote on community change and sort of what lies ahead for us for 2021. And then what we'll do is bounce folks into a couple of small groups and give you just sort of more expansive space to connect and share ideas with each other and talk. And then we'll come back and wrap up with some more poems and more music. So this is our third Civic Saturday, my third talk, and the third time I was compelled to start in a similar place, which is essentially, hey, we're tired. As a flashback to August when we started this, my first line was, how are you feeling this morning? Overwhelmed? And in October, it was all the spaces I've been in these last weeks. Everybody has been using battery analogies to describe themselves as drained. Into December, maybe we'll just simplify it and I'll say, hey, I'm tired. But today, even more so, I'm hopeful too. I feel like I'm starting to move to the other side of this, and I hope you are too. And it doesn't really come much from anything outside our own borders, other than maybe the pandemic front, where amid all of this darkness, there's some rays of light. But it's really on reflecting on all of the adaptations and transformations and support that's emerged here in Winona around these really tough times. It's been bold and tentative and loud and quiet and spontaneous and intentional. Some of it is really easily seen. Some of it's just beginning to emerge. And what I really love to see is a lot of this coming from this beautiful relearning and re-embracing of this concept of mutual aid, of people coming together just to support each other for no other reason than to just support each other. The Neighbors Helping Neighbors group, which as you see Kendra in your small groups or in your large group, give her some applause as one of the lead moderators and managers there. And they're doing all of this amazing work, and just lately having transitioned from masks and gift cards to coordinating wintertime chores and delivering holiday meals. I've been really moved by this woman named Alicia, who has this Facebook group called Winona Angel she's been doing, where she just sort of raises her hand and says, I'm going to sponsor some families in need, and you help me help get them some holiday time presents. And she's connected with more than 100 families already, really spontaneously, and it continues to grow. And our Winona Community Foundation, which launched also fairly spontaneously, this COVID relief fund, which has since received like hundreds of thousands of dollars, which just flowed very quickly to places where it's needed. And most recently, they wrote a big check to the Community Warming Center, where the need has never really been higher for overnight homeless population. And so seeing these renewed efforts to transform community systems to be more responsive and compassionate, and the addition of trained mental health workers as an alternative response to law enforcement in the city, the renewed discussions and alternative ideas around the county's jail plans, but just all of these things that are starting to emerge, and whether it's easy to see it or not, and maybe not easy to see it yet because we're all still like stuck inside our houses looking at each other on these screens like we are this morning. I don't think I've left the house in 4 or 5 days. We're in the middle of a transformation here in Winona. I believe that anyway. It's new, it's emerging, it's delicate, and it needs a lot of care and attention and nourishment, but it's happening. And whatever your dreams are for Winona in these coming years, big or small, contained to yourself or across community, that hopefully there's a little bit more space and attention for them that there may have been just a little while ago because of everything that's happened this year. So I just wanted to translate that feeling of hope into a couple of actionable steps as we're preparing to enter a new year and finally set this weary one aside. Just kind of a couple of rules of resolution. One is dream big and then focus on what's meaningful and achievable. The second is come together and work together. The community power really matters. And the third is just take care of yourself. So dream big and focus on what's meaningful and achievable. At Engage Winona, we use this phrase all the time, meaningful and achievable. So meaningful is big enough to matter, achievable, small enough to get it done. And first knowing that you just got to dream big, which we're going to invite you to do in a second here. And knowing that it's not at all mutually exclusive with working on a level that's meaningful and achievable. Like you can do both. You can dream big and work meaningfully and achievably. And that the beautiful thing about getting to dream big, and especially thinking about trying to unlock that capacity again as we're looking toward this new year, is that it's an opportunity to really redraw the world and its boundaries. And meanwhile, the tough thing is that this conditioning, this inner narrative, this voice in your head is just sort of there to disrupt you at every turn. I think a lot when I think about dreaming big, this longtime teacher at Bluffview here in town who taught pretty much every grade at one point or another and always ended up working back with 4th through 6th graders, and especially 4th graders. And I remember she shared once that she loved working with 4th graders the best because they were old enough to fully express their imagination, and yet not old enough, most of them anyway, to have started layering on these scars and hurts and judgments and expectations that start to bury and sort of cover over these big dreams. And so really the call to action today is to activate your inner 4th grader. You know, old enough to sort of fully express these big dreams, not old enough maybe yet to have covered them and layered them with all this, it can't happen, it won't happen, we don't have this, we don't have that. And so an invitation that we often teach it like this at Engage Winona is to find a quiet space, close your eyes, breathe, and turn off that inner critic. And sometimes it actually helps to draw that inner critic, like a cartoon, a stick figure, whatever talent you have, it doesn't matter. You kind of have to turn off your inner critic and drawing your inner critic, otherwise it gets hard. But to draw it, give it a name, and then just sort of set it aside and get to dreaming. So if you find yourself stuck this month as you're sort of imagining what 2020 could bring, and you have that inner critic kind of like running rampant in your head, draw it on a page, give it a name, humanize it, and just sort of set it aside. And so I'm going to do a little bit of dreaming, then you can come back and tell me how all this isn't going to work. I'm not going to listen as much. And then the planning piece, that's meaningful and achievable. Just thinking sort of a step at a time, what's big enough to matter, and then focused enough to be accomplished. And then doing all that without ever really losing track of the larger dream. This quote we've been lifting up a lot this year from Angela Davis really says it best, that you have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And then you have to do it all the time. It doesn't say that you just have to act as if it were possible to radically transform the world. And you have to do it all the time. So the action of vision, the action of dreaming is actually what create a lot of change. And the second piece, like coming together and working together, the community power really matters. Maya Williams, many of you saw her here in October as our featured poet, is also a facilitator in another project we're running called Lived Experience Leaders. And she's this really great activist and change maker who's worked across the world, and led a session a few weeks ago where she really lifted up some myths of power and change making, these things that really just get in our way every time we're thinking about good ideas. And she shared a couple in the group, and then gave permission for me to share a few of them here with you all today, as some of these inner critics that can kind of get in the way. And one being that you need to be in or work within existing structures to make change. There's often this myth that we need to join something, be a part of something, lead something, run for something. And undoubtedly good change happens there, but it all happens in a lot of other places too. That you need a lot of people to do something, when often it could just be a tiny group of really passionate people excited about something. That you need to assimilate into the dominant culture, like this is how we do things here. That you must solve problems yourself rather than relying on your larger community. And this myth that you're responsible when something succeeds or fails, and not actually the surrounding ecosystem, which trips us up a lot. And we see a lot of folks really step back from trying to want to create community change by feeling like they were personally responsible for something that failed when maybe it wasn't the right time, or maybe there was too much power in the other direction, or it doesn't quite work for a number of reasons. And yet folks will sort of take this very personally, and it's difficult, and it really makes them reluctant to continue engaging. And I share those only because I wanted to just put them in your head as you're imagining some of this change you're about to do, that if any of these have stood in your way, that there's really good news that they are just mythologies. There's some reality to them too, but there's just mythologies. And that's really what Engage Winona is here too, to help folks sort of work through those. that you don't need everyone, you just need a few committed folks. I've always been really moved by that statistic, which is a fairly rigorous one, that like in major revolutions, transformations, shifts in community and culture, even in organizations, don't actually start by one great leader at the top announcing something. And don't always start from this huge collective mass, but it really starts from like a small group of folks, like 2 to 5% of the population at any given time. If they get really passionate and moving about something, that's what really starts to drive the vast majority of change. And that asking for help is not a sign of weakness, and that if something fails, it's not your fault, and often not your fault. You know, in this stoic, like stiff upper lip Midwest culture we have, we're often taught that we're alone in our work and our successes and our suffering, and it's all ours to bear, and that it's on us, when really it isn't. And I think the idea of sort of leaning into community and this larger vision of creating change can be so much more powerful than really sort of like holding ourselves personally responsible sometimes for things that work or don't. And then just finally, that last piece of take care of yourself, which has been this real consistent thread through all of our Civic Saturdays this fall, that you are your work and you are your journey, and the two are not separate. That rest and care aren't self-indulgences, but really radical and political acts of sustaining yourself, especially as you're doing work that faces resistance. So dream big, make the meaningful and achievable plans, and then, you know, just set them aside for a bit and rest up and don't apologize for it. And to close, I just wanted to share the brief process that I shared at our October Civic Saturday about this individual work of change making and making it sustainable, which is showing up. That really critical first one, even if you don't quite know what's happening or why you want to be there, but just showing up. Reaching in for some of these inner wisdoms and practices and ways of just being present. A lot of the things Marcia talked about this morning, reaching out to connect with others, and then the important piece of resting and then repeating. So my resolution and my hope for 2021 for us, for all of us, for some of the change we hope to see just here, right here in this kind of small place, small and beautiful place we've chosen to live and work and build, is to dream big, to focus on what's meaningful and achievable, to come together, work together, and to take care of yourself. So thanks, everyone. And at this point, you are done listening to me talk, and it's time for you to engage with each other. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create 2 breakout rooms. Facilitators, we'll just kind of see how you bounce into the rooms. One of you can take the lead to read the small script, and we'll go from there. We'll have a good 25 minutes together in our small groups, and really just to reflect on a couple of questions. And I'm going to put them in the chat, and I'll share them too in the groups as you go. One is just reflecting on what spoke to you in the music, poems, and readings. And then the big couple ones around sharing into your group, like what bright spots in the community did you see in 2020? We've spent a lot of time really focused, not here, but just sort of in our year, really focused on all of these big, hard, heavy challenges. And so if we can shifting that perspective, identifying one thing, could be a big dream, could be meaningful and achievable. You would really personally like to see movement and change around Winona in 2021. This is really a judgment-free sharing. It's not going to engage in any debate or sort of building out of this, just to share it into this space. And then as you come to that part, just sharing what you may do for self-care and rest. We talk a lot about just sort of speaking something out loud as a commitment to it. So if you're really challenged by that, if just sharing that with a small group of people, sometimes will sort of force you to do it, especially if you're not good at it. I'm terrible at it. I'm really good at it, but talking about it and not actually doing these things. So maybe I'll find a way to speak it too. So the questions are in the chat. I'm going to move people into just 2 breakout rooms, and it looks like the facilitators sorted really naturally. We have Joe and Beth in one room and Kendra and Molly in the other. One of you can self-nominate to read the script, and then both of you are participants too, and then go from there. And so you'll have about 25 minutes in the rooms, and then we'll come back with some music and poems to close our morning together. Welcome back, everyone. Hope the small breakout rooms went well. I missed the ability to sort of roam and sit down and stand up and transition. But we're we're going to close where we started, which is featuring our local artists of the morning. So I'm going to turn it over to Mason and Dante first, and then we'll go back to Marcia, and then we'll close our time together this morning. So Mason and Dante, you're on.
All right. This one's it's an original piece. I mean, they all have been, but it's on our soon-to-be third album, but our second album hasn't come out yet. So I guess if you want to follow us, do that on Facebook and Instagram. That would probably be the best way. Karate Chop Silence. That's the name on both of them. But yeah, this is off of our third album that hasn't come out yet. Often so slow. Might need something just to soften the blow. Might need something. But tomorrow there'll be somewhere to go. Your mama don't mind, your daddy don't mind. Smiling behind her eyeliner while they're in the lines. The night moves often, night moves often, the night moves often. Come on. Night moves over, 'cause they're miles away. And a better day. And you're miles away. Thank you for mine. Yeah, they're miles away. So fast, might know nothing, nothing will last. They might know nothing, nothing. But yesterday's only the past. Your mama don't mind, your daddy don't mind. Smiling behind your eyeliner while they in the lights. The night is over, the night is over, the night is over. Come on. Baby. Come on. Night is over, 'cause they're miles away. Miles away and go to bed at 8. you're mine. And that's that.
Thanks, Mason. Thanks, Dante. Thanks, Karate Chop Silence. That mic sounds real good. And so, Marcia, I will turn it back over to you.
Right. So this has been beautiful. I'm going to take you now to the forest by way of the internet. I read a book called The Overstory last year, which is all about how trees can communicate with each other underground. And they're interconnected networks of roots where trees can actually share nutrients with each other across species. And if a tree is threatened, they can send distress signals to help all the other trees prepare. And if a tree is about to die, they actually give their carbon back to the earth and share it with the trees around them. So that's beautiful. And I think we can learn a lot from forests in that way. But I'm going to start by taking us through Neighbors Helping Neighbors, the Facebook group, and a couple of just instances that stood out to me. And I have a love-hate relationship with the internet. Obviously, it makes things like this possible, but it's also a scary place sometimes. But these poems celebrate that idea of connectedness. So, a pileated woodpecker in the zoomed-in picture, filtered through window and screen. An armchair birdwatcher shares it on Facebook, the picture grainy on my screen, a window through which I, too, see the bird and the screen and the window, and am somehow for a moment sitting in the same chair, aiming my phone camera at the majestic bird, its body so large, yet so easily held there on the horizontal branch. There are so-called corners of the internet where people float support for genocide, real casual. And there are other corners of the internet where people ask for help for the first time in their lives. Buoyed by desperation, having watched through the screen, others ask and receive also for the first time. And around their need, a huddle forms. And it is this function of the internet, container that it is for all our best and worst, vessel ungainly and heartless, that so many of us wish we could forgo. The huddle of help, the corner of kindness, this the web of connections we cannot live without. So that's the first one. And the second poem is inspired a little bit by Sarah Johnson, the creative laureate of the city of Winona and A Beautiful Soul. She has a painted sign by her house on the way to, we see it on our way to Holzinger when we go hiking. And it says, "Be the history you want your great, great, great grandchildren to read." So this last poem for you, again, going back to the forest, it's inspired by a hike that I took in Holzinger in October, where there were so many leaves that you couldn't see the path. And I was literally swimming in them. I mean, they were up to my knees. I could have just fallen forward and the leaves would have caught me. So it's exploring that idea of abundance. There is enough shelter for every living thing in the forest. Leaves pile up knee deep in the lee of the wind. And for all those that blow away or break, brittle against the rocky path, there are millions more that remain to give their carbon back to the earth. Slowly they soften, split, mold, rot. Scent of toast and wine and used tea bags, gardening gloves and mud puddles. Let's learn from this abundance, the past giving to the future more than enough, a legacy of shelter and the means to build it up. Thanks, everyone.
So thanks to Marcia, thanks to Mason and Dante, thanks to our facilitators, and thanks to all of you for being here. We know that December, it is fully fried, especially this idea of being virtual. The vision for what we're doing here today was actually born in pre-COVID times, and it sort of involved a shared space and some food and fellowship. We have not lost sight of that, even though that COVID has kind of an uncertain future. So we don't have immediate plans for these next gatherings, but we were going to keep this vision and this idea of this alive. And we would really love to see all of you back at future ones, whether it's sort of sustaining ourselves in the winter ahead through a virtual gathering, and then eventually, hopefully, in a shared space doing this together, which is like the really the vision we're hoping to realize when it makes sense to do that. So thanks to everyone. I think just